I stared at the bank statement in my trembling hands. The numbers blurred through my tears, but I could still make them out. $47 million. $47 million. And the account belonged to my son-in-law, the same man who had been living in my guest bedroom for the past 4 years, the same man who couldn't afford to buy my daughter a wedding ring. Let me take you back to where this all started. My name is Patricia. I'm 63 years old, retired after 38 years as a pediatric nurse in Boston. I raised my daughter Margaret alone after my husband passed away when she was just 7. Cancer took him fast, left us with nothing but memories and a small life insurance policy that I stretched like saltwater taffy to put her through college. Margaret was always my pride. Graduated top of her class from Boston University, got her teaching credential, landed a job at an elementary school in Cambridge. She was 29, independent, happy. I thought she had her whole life figured out. Then she met him, Thomas Chen. She brought him home for Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago. He was 42 at the time, 13 years older than her, quiet, polite, wore clothes that looked like they came from a thrift store. He barely spoke during dinner, just smiled softly whenever Margaret looked at him. After he left, I pulled my daughter aside. "Who is this man? What does he do?" Margaret's eyes lit up the way they used to when she was a little girl talking about Christmas. "He's a writer, Mom. He's working on his novel. He's been working on it for years. It's going to be incredible. A writer. Working on a novel. For years. I've lived long enough to know what that usually means." "And how does he support himself?" I asked carefully. "He does odd jobs, tutoring, some freelance editing. He doesn't need much, Mom. He's not materialistic like other guys." I bit my tongue. I wanted to say that not being materialistic was easy when you had nothing. I wanted to say that at 42, a man should have more to show for himself than an unfinished manuscript. But I saw the way Margaret looked at him. I saw that same blind devotion I had for her father when we were young. So I said nothing. 6 months later, they got engaged. There was no ring. Thomas explained that he didn't believe in the diamond industry, something about exploitation and marketing schemes. Margaret nodded along like it made perfect sense. The wedding was small. Courthouse ceremony. Margaret wore a dress we found on sale at Macy's. Thomas wore the same blazer he'd worn to Thanksgiving. My daughter had dreamed of a garden wedding since she was 12 years old. She used to cut pictures from bridal magazines and paste them in a scrapbook. That scrapbook was still in a box in my attic somewhere, but she said she didn't need any of that. She had Thomas. That was enough. After the wedding, they moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Somerville. The rent was cheap because the heating barely worked and there was mold in the bathroom. Margaret never complained. She said it had character. I started to worry when I noticed she was picking up extra shifts, tutoring after school, teaching summer programs, taking on more and more work while Thomas stayed home, writing his novel. One day, I visited their apartment unannounced. Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, staring at the screen. There was a coffee cup next to him that looked like it had been there for days. "How's the book coming along?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He looked up at me with those calm eyes of his. Slowly. "These things take time, Patricia. You can't rush art." Art. He called it art. I looked around the apartment. The peeling wallpaper, the secondhand furniture, the draft coming through the window that Margaret had stuffed with newspaper to keep out the cold. "Maybe you could find some part-time work," I suggested, "just to help out while you're writing." Thomas smiled, that infuriating, gentle smile. "Margaret and I have discussed it. She believes in my work. She wants me to focus." She believes in my work. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. I wanted to tell him that belief doesn't pay the electricity bill, that my daughter was exhausting herself while he sat in his bathrobe philosophizing about art. But I held back. Margaret was a grown woman. She had made her choice. Things got worse. A year into the marriage, Margaret called me crying. Her car had broken down. The repair cost was $2,000, money she didn't have because she'd been covering all their expenses while Thomas contributed nothing. "I can help," I said immediately. "No, Mom, I can figure it out." But she couldn't. A week later, I found out she'd been taking the bus to work in the freezing Boston winter. A 90-minute commute each way while her husband sat in their warm apartment working on his masterpiece. I transferred money into her account anyway. She called me angry, said she didn't need charity. I told her it wasn't charity, it was love. We didn't speak for 2 weeks after that. My friends started asking questions. "How's Margaret doing?" my neighbor Helen would ask, that knowing look in her eyes. "Fine." "Great." "Busy with work." "And that husband of hers? Still writing that book?" I learned to change the subject. My sister Barbara was less subtle. "Patricia, you need to say something. That man is using your daughter. She loves him. Love doesn't mean being someone's personal ATM. Has he sold anything? Even a short story?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. I'd stopped asking Margaret about Thomas's career because I couldn't bear to hear her make excuses for him. 2 years passed. 2 years of watching my daughter work herself ragged while her husband contributed nothing. 2 years of biting my tongue, of sending money I pretended was for birthdays and holidays, of lying awake at night wondering where I'd gone wrong as a mother. Then Margaret got pregnant. She was so happy when she told me. Glowing. She said this was a sign that everything was falling into place. Thomas was almost finished with his novel, she said. Just a few more months. Once it was published, everything would change. I smiled and hugged her and told her I was thrilled. Inside, I was terrified. A baby. How were they going to afford a baby when they could barely afford themselves? The pregnancy was difficult. Margaret developed gestational diabetes. She needed to cut back on work, but she couldn't afford to. She was the only income. Thomas offered to look for a job, but somehow nothing ever materialized. The interviews never led anywhere. The opportunities fell through. "He's trying," Margaret assured me. "It's hard out there." At 7 months pregnant, Margaret fainted at school. One of her students found her on the classroom floor. They called an ambulance. The doctor said she was overworked, stressed, exhausted. He told her to rest. Rest. How could she rest when she had a husband to support? That's when I made the decision. I called Margaret. "Move in with me, both of you, until the baby comes and you get back on your feet." "Mom, we can't. It's not a discussion. I have 4 bedrooms in this house and I'm alone. You need help. Let me help," she cried, said she felt like a failure, said she never wanted to burden me. "You're my daughter," I said. "You could never be a burden." They moved in the following week. I converted the guest bedroom into their room. I set up the small study as a nursery. I painted the walls yellow myself because Thomas said he would do it, but then got caught up in a crucial chapter of his book. For the next 3 months, I cooked for them, cleaned for them, drove Margaret to her doctor's appointments when Thomas was too absorbed in his writing to remember. I watched my savings dwindle as I covered groceries, utilities, all the extras that come with having 2 additional people in your home. I told myself it was temporary. Once the baby came, once Thomas finished his book, once things settled down. The baby arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. A girl. Margaret named her Eleanor, after her grandmother. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet demeanor. I fell in love instantly, held her in my arms and felt something I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. Hope, pure, uncomplicated hope. Thomas seemed moved too. I caught him standing over the crib at night, just watching Eleanor sleep. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Tenderness, yes, but also something else. Something like fear. Months passed. Margaret was supposed to go back to work after maternity leave, but childcare in Boston costs more than rent. We did the math together, sitting at my kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills. It made more sense for her to stay home with Eleanor. At least for now. At least for now became a year. Then another year. Thomas's novel remained unfinished. He'd been working on it for 6 years at this point. Whenever I asked about it, he gave vague answers. It was coming together. The ending was tricky. These things couldn't be forced. I started to wonder if the novel even existed. One afternoon, while Thomas was out getting groceries, I did something I'm not proud of. I went into their bedroom and opened his laptop. I just wanted to see. Just wanted to know if there was actually a book, or if this whole thing had been a fantasy he'd constructed to avoid adult responsibility. The file was there, titled simply, Novel. I clicked on it. 432 pages. I scrolled through them. Real sentences, real paragraphs. It wasn't nothing. It was something. I read the first chapter, then the second. Then I couldn't stop. It was beautiful, haunting. The story of a Chinese-American family spanning 3 generations, from immigration to assimilation to reclamation. The prose was lyrical without being pretentious. The characters felt alive. I sat there for an hour, reading, crying, completely absorbed. When I finally closed the laptop, I felt ashamed of every cruel thought I'd ever had about my son-in-law. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't a user. He was an artist, a real one, working on something that mattered. Maybe I'd been too harsh. Maybe I just didn't understand. I decided to be more patient, more supportive. I told myself that genius took time, that the struggle was part of the process. I stopped making passive-aggressive comments about job searches. I stopped leaving employment listings on the kitchen counter. Another year passed. Eleanor started preschool. Margaret found part-time work at a tutoring center. Things seemed to be stabilizing. Then I got sick. It started with fatigue. Then shortness of breath. My doctor ran tests. The results came back concerning enough that she ordered more tests. Those came back worse. My heart. Years of stress and grief and working double shifts had taken their toll. I needed surgery. The bypass kind. The expensive kind. I hadn't told Margaret yet. I was trying to figure out how to break the news without adding to her stress. She had enough to worry about. That's when I found the letter. I was looking for my insurance documents in the filing cabinet in my home office. I kept everything organized in labeled folders, but somehow an envelope had slipped behind the drawer. When I pulled it out, I saw it was addressed to Thomas. The return address was from a wealth management firm in New York, Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management. My first thought was that it must be junk mail. Some kind of scam targeting people with offers that sounded too good to be true. But the envelope had been opened. Thomas had read this. I know I shouldn't have looked. It wasn't addressed to me. It was none of my business. But I'd already crossed that line once, with the laptop. And something about this felt important. I pulled out the letter. Dear Mr. Chen, it began. Please find enclosed your quarterly statement for the period ending March 31st. Your current portfolio value stands at $47,300,000. As discussed, the annual disbursement to the charitable foundation has been processed according to your instructions. The paper fell from my hands. $47 million. I read it again. Then again. The words didn't change. I dug further into the envelope. Found the full statement. Pages and pages of investments, stocks, bonds, real estate holdings. A charitable foundation bearing his family name. My son-in-law, the struggling artist who couldn't afford a wedding ring, was worth $47 million. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me. I had to grip the edge of my desk to stay upright. 4 years. 4 years of watching my daughter work herself to exhaustion. 4 years of my savings draining away to support a man who could have bought this entire neighborhood without blinking. 4 years of feeling guilty for doubting him, of telling myself I was being too harsh, of reading his beautiful novel and believing he was a misunderstood genius, struggling to create art. He wasn't struggling. He had never been struggling. He had been lying. The rage that rose in me was unlike anything I'd felt before. It was cold and hot at the same time. It made my hands shake and my vision narrow. I wanted to march into the living room where he was probably sitting right now, reading or pretending to write, and I wanted to scream at him until my throat gave out. But I didn't. 63 years of life had taught me that anger, especially the righteous kind, needed to be handled carefully. I needed to think. I needed to understand. Why? That was the question. Why would a man with $47 million pretend to be poor? Why would he let his wife work double shifts? Why would he move into his mother-in-law's house and watch her spend her retirement savings on groceries? Nothing made sense. I put the letter back in the envelope, placed the envelope exactly where I'd found it. Then I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat in the dark for a long time. That night at dinner, I watched Thomas. He ate my pot roast and complimented it, the same way he always did. He helped Eleanor cut her meat into small pieces. He asked Margaret about her day and listened attentively to her answer. He cleared the dishes and loaded the dishwasher while I pretended to watch television. He seemed so normal, so genuine, not like a con man, not like someone running an elaborate deception, but the letter was real. The $47 million was real. For a week, I said nothing. I observed. I analyzed. I tried to find some explanation that didn't make my son-in-law a monster. I couldn't. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Margaret took Eleanor to her dance class, until Thomas and I were alone in the house. He was in the study, laptop open, probably working on that eternal novel. I knocked on the doorframe. "Thomas! We need to talk." He looked up, surprised. I rarely sought him out. We were cordial but not close. He was my daughter's husband, not my friend. "Of course, Patricia. Is everything okay?" I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. "I found something," I said. My voice was steady. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. A letter from Goldman Sachs. A quarterly statement. The color drained from his face. "I know you have $47 million. I kept my eyes locked on his. "I know you've had it this whole time. Through the courthouse wedding, through the apartment with the mold, through my daughter working until she fainted, through living in my house and eating my food and letting me pay for everything while you sat there pretending to be a struggling artist." Thomas closed his laptop slowly. His hands were trembling. "Patricia, don't." My voice cracked. "Don't you dare make excuses. I want to know why. I deserve to know why. My daughter deserves to know why." For a long moment, he didn't speak, just sat there, head bowed, like a man awaiting sentencing. Then he looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Tears. "I was going to tell her," he said quietly. "So many times I was going to tell her, but you didn't." "No, I didn't." "Why?" He took a shaky breath. "Do you know how I got that money, Patricia? I hadn't thought to wonder. I'd been too angry to be curious. My father," he continued, "he built a manufacturing empire in Taiwan. Factories. Hundreds of factories. He was ruthless. Worked his employees to the bone. Paid them nothing. Destroyed competitors. Bribed officials. He built his fortune on the backs of people he saw as expendable." He paused, staring at his hands. "I grew up with every privilege. Private schools, luxury cars, anything I wanted, but I also grew up watching what money did to people, how it corrupted them, how it made them suspicious of everyone. My mother spent her life wondering if my father loved her or just needed a suitable wife. My siblings fight constantly over inheritance, even though there's enough for everyone 10 times over. Every relationship in my family is poisoned by wealth. That doesn't explain." "Let me finish, please." I crossed my arms but stayed silent. When I came to America for graduate school, I made a decision. I would never tell anyone about my family's money. I wanted to know what it felt like to be ordinary, to have relationships based on something other than my bank account, to find out who I really was without the Chen family fortune defining me. He looked at me directly. "I've been tested before, Patricia. Women who seemed to love me until they found out about the money, and then loved me differently. Friends who borrowed and never paid back. People who saw me as an opportunity, not a person. After a while, I stopped trusting anyone." "And Margaret?" His expression softened. Margaret was different. From the very first moment, she saw me struggling in a coffee shop, trying to fix a laptop I couldn't afford to repair. She offered to help. She didn't know anything about me. She just saw someone who needed kindness, and she gave it. "So you decided to test her? For 4 years?" "It wasn't a test at first." He shook his head. "I just didn't want to ruin it. She loved me, the real me, the broke writer with big dreams and nothing to show for them. She loved me anyway. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how precious? But you let her suffer. You let her work herself sick while you sat on millions." "I know," his voice broke. "I know, and I hate myself for it. Every time she picked up an extra shift, every time she calculated whether we could afford groceries, I wanted to tell her. But I was terrified. Terrified of what? Of losing her, of watching her change the way everyone else changed, of seeing that look in her eyes, the one that says, 'I'm calculating what you're worth.' I couldn't bear it, Patricia. I love her more than I've ever loved anything." I stood there, processing his words. Part of me understood. The wealthy carry a different kind of burden, a constant uncertainty about others' motives. I'd seen it in my nursing career, families fighting over dying relatives' estates, love curdling into greed. But another part of me was still furious. "You watched me spend my savings," I said. "You watched me work myself into a heart condition trying to keep this family afloat. Did you know I need surgery, Thomas? A heart bypass? Did you know I've been trying to figure out how to pay for it?" His face crumpled. No, I didn't know. Patricia, I'm so sorry. I never meant. What did you mean? What was your plan? Were you going to watch my daughter become a widow because her mother couldn't afford medical care? Were you going to stand at my funeral knowing you could have helped? I was going to tell her, he said desperately. After Eleanor started school, after things stabilized, I had it all planned out. I was going to explain everything, set up trusts for Eleanor, make sure you and Margaret never had to worry about money again. I just needed more time. Time! I laughed bitterly. You've had 4 years. How much time does a man need? He had no answer for that. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. The afternoon light shifted across the room, painting shadows on the walls. Finally, I spoke again. You need to tell Margaret. Today. Right now. I know. And Thomas? I waited until he met my eyes. If she decides to leave you over this, I will support her completely. You understand that? I understand. But if you're telling the truth, if you really love her and this wasn't some elaborate game, then you need to prove it, not with money, with honesty, starting now and never stopping. He nodded slowly. Margaret came home an hour later, Eleanor chattering about her dance class, showing us the new moves she'd learned. I took my granddaughter to the kitchen for a snack, while Thomas asked his wife to join him in the study. I don't know exactly what he said to her. I only heard fragments through the door. Crying, shouting, more crying. Eleanor looked up at me with worried eyes, and I held her close and told her everything would be okay. 2 hours later, Margaret emerged. Her eyes were red and swollen. She walked past me without a word and went straight to the guest bedroom. Closed the door. Thomas appeared in the doorway, looking destroyed. She needs time, he said quietly. I'm going to get a hotel room. Maybe that's best. He paused at the front door. Thank you, Patricia, for confronting me, for not letting me keep lying to her. I didn't do it for you. I know. He left. For 3 days, Margaret barely spoke. She went through the motions of caring for Eleanor, but I could see the devastation in her eyes. Every belief she'd had about her marriage, about her husband, about their entire life together, had been shattered. I gave her space but stayed close, made sure she ate, took over the bedtime routines, let her know I was there without forcing conversation. On the 4th day, she finally came to me. Did you know? She asked. Before you found the letter? No. I suspected something was wrong, but not this. Never this. 4 years, Mom. 4 years of struggling while he had $47 million. How am I supposed to process that? I took her hands in mine. Do you love him? I don't know anymore. I thought I did. I thought I knew who he was, but the man I married doesn't exist. He was a character Thomas was playing. Or, I said carefully, the man you married is exactly who he showed you. The gentle soul, the devoted father, the person who makes you laugh and holds you when you cry. Maybe the money is the lie, not the love. Margaret stared at me. Are you defending him? After everything he put us through? I'm not defending him. What he did was wrong. Deeply, painfully wrong. But I've watched him with you and Eleanor. That's not an act, Margaret. No one's that good an actor for 4 years. Then why? Why put us through all this? I told her what Thomas had told me. About his father. About the corruption of wealth. About being tested and betrayed, and learning to trust no one. He was afraid, I concluded, afraid of losing the only pure thing in his life. That's not an excuse. No, it's not. But it might be an explanation. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised me. He called me this morning. Asked if he could come back. Just to talk. He said he wants to show me something. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. She looked at me with her father's eyes, searching and serious. What do you think I should do, Mom? I think you should hear him out. And then make whatever decision is right for you, regardless of the money, regardless of me, regardless of anything except what you need to be happy. Thomas came back that afternoon. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, but he was carrying a thick folder. We sat in the living room, all three of us. Eleanor was at a playdate, mercifully oblivious to the upheaval in her family. Thomas opened the folder and spread papers across the coffee table. "I want to show you something," he said to Margaret. "I've been working on this for the past 2 years. I should have told you sooner. I should have told you everything sooner." The papers were legal documents, trust agreements, foundation charters, investment plans. "This is a trust for Eleanor," he explained, pointing to one document. "It's fully funded. By the time she's 18, it will be worth enough to pay for any college in the world, with plenty left over." He pointed to another. "This is a charitable foundation in my family's name. We fund education initiatives in the communities my father exploited. Schools, scholarships, vocational training. It's my way of trying to make amends for how that money was made." Then he pulled out one final document. "And this," he said, his voice trembling, "is a deed. For a house in Brookline. I bought it 6 months ago. 4 bedrooms, big backyard, good school district. I was going to surprise you for our anniversary. I was finally ready to tell you everything." Margaret stared at the papers. "Why didn't you?" "Because your mother got sick. And everything got complicated. And I kept finding excuses to delay." He reached for her hand. "I was a coward, Margaret. I spent so long protecting myself that I forgot I wasn't alone anymore. I have a family now, a real one, and I almost destroyed it because I couldn't let go of old fears." Tears were streaming down Margaret's face. "I don't care about the money, Thomas. I never cared about the money. I know, that's why I love you. But you lied to me. For 4 years. I know that too." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life earning your trust back. Not with money, with truth. Complete truth, about everything, from now on." Margaret looked at me. I nodded slightly. She turned back to her husband. "I need time. Take as much as you need. And I need you to do something for my mother." Thomas nodded immediately. "Anything. Whatever she needs. Her surgery. I want you to pay for it. The best doctors, the best hospital. Whatever it takes. Consider it done." I tried to protest. "Margaret, that's not—" "Mom." She cut me off. "You've spent your entire life taking care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for once." I couldn't argue. I was too tired, too overwhelmed, and honestly, too relieved. The surgery happened 2 weeks later. Thomas flew in a specialist from the Cleveland Clinic. I had my own private room, round-the-clock nursing care, every possible comfort. It felt strange, accepting so much after struggling for so long, but I let it happen. For Margaret, for Eleanor, for myself. I recovered slowly. Weeks of rest, of physical therapy, of learning to take it easy for the first time in my life. Thomas visited every day, brought flowers, sat with me and talked about his book, which he'd finally finished. Yes, he finished it. 487 pages. He let me read the final draft, and it was even more beautiful than I remembered. Raw and honest and unflinching in its examination of family, money, and the lies we tell to protect what we love. Margaret read it too. She cried through most of it. When she finished, she held her husband and didn't let go for a long time. They're working things out. It's not easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild overnight. There are hard conversations, tears, moments of doubt, but there's also love. Real, tested, proven love. They moved into the house in Brookline last month. I went with them. Not because I need taking care of, but because they asked. Because we're a family. Because after everything we've been through, none of us want to be apart. Eleanor has her own room now, painted purple because that's her favorite color. Margaret has a studio where she's rediscovered her love of painting, something she gave up years ago because she didn't have time. Thomas still writes every day, but now he also takes Eleanor to school and cooks dinner and does all the things he should have been doing all along. And me? I sit in my sunny corner room with a view of the garden, and I write letters to old friends. I play with my granddaughter. I take walks around the neighborhood, slowly building my strength back up. Sometimes Thomas joins me on those walks. We talk about life, about mistakes, about second chances. He's not perfect. None of us are. But he's trying. Every day, he's trying. Last week, Margaret showed me a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Thomas gave it to me," she said. "He said he should have done this years ago." I looked at my daughter, this woman who had endured so much, who had loved without conditions, who had been hurt and still chose to heal. "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. Not the ring, the whole thing. The messy, complicated, painful, beautiful story of a family learning to trust each other, learning that love isn't about money or struggle or sacrifice. It's about showing up day after day and choosing each other despite everything. Thomas is a good father. That much was never a lie. I watch him with Eleanor, teaching her to paint, reading her stories, listening to her endless questions with infinite patience. Whatever else he got wrong, he got that right. And his book? It's being published next spring. A major publisher. 6-figure advance. Already generating buzz. He's donating his share of the proceeds to the foundation. Says he doesn't need more money. Says he just needed someone to believe in him long enough to finish. Margaret believed in him for 4 years when she thought he had nothing. Now that she knows he has everything, she believes in him still. Not because of what he has, but because of who he is. That's the kind of love that survives. That's the kind of love I had with Margaret's father all those years ago. The kind that doesn't count costs or keep score. I'm 77 years old now. I've seen a lot of love in my time, and a lot of heartbreak. But watching my daughter and her husband rebuild what was nearly lost, watching them choose each other over and over again, I've learned something important. The money was never the point. The lies were never the point. The point was learning that some things are worth more than comfort or security or certainty. Some things, like family, like trust, like forgiveness, have to be chosen every single day. Thomas chose to protect himself at the cost of truth. Margaret chose to love without conditions. I chose to confront what I found instead of letting it fester. And together, we chose to be a family. That's the real fortune. That's the only one that matters. If you're still here, thank you for listening to my story. It's not the story I expected to tell. 4 years ago, I thought I knew what was happening in my daughter's marriage. Turns out I didn't know anything. But that's life, isn't it? We think we understand, and then we learn we don't. We think we know people, and then they surprise us. Sometimes the surprises are terrible. Sometimes they're wonderful. And sometimes, like with Thomas, they're both at once. If you liked this story, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done in Margaret's place. Would you have forgiven him? Would you have walked away? I read every comment, and I promise you, whatever you're going through right now, whatever secrets are lurking in your life waiting to be discovered, there's a way through. There's always a way through. Family is everything. But family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up when things get hard. The people who stay when they could leave. The people who choose you. Again and again. Even when choosing is difficult. Thomas chose Margaret. Margaret chose Thomas. And somewhere along the way, I chose to be the mother-in-law who confronts hard truths instead of ignoring them. I'm grateful for that choice every single day. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.